colleagues, I call you colleagues from foreign Post, with whom we have collaborated for years now. I begin with Mrs. Margaux Meidinger, who is the head of the European CSR Affairs at Le Groupe La Poste, in French Post. And she also is the chairwoman of the CSR Circle of PostEurop. CSR is the circle of PostEurop that has to do with corporate social responsibility issues. Margaux, welcome. I give you the floor. Thank you very much. I will tell you a few words in Greek and then I will continue in English. Welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for the Hellenic Post and Aphrodite for her invitation. I believe that this initiative of Hellenic Post is very good in carrying out a virtual event and to invite people from the international framework. And it is my honor to be here today and give you this presentation.
Yes, I will share your screen. Is it okay? Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Great.
So I indicate you when I want to change then. Okay. Good. So as I was saying, it's my pleasure today to present you a project, European project that has been conducted in the framework of an instance which is called the European Social Dialogue Committee for the Postal Sector. This project that I will present you had the ambition to elaborate scenarios. So we had the ambition to elaborate between 3 and 5 scenarios on what will be the European postal sector in 2030. So my intention today is to drive you through the process of this project and also through the 5 scenarios that we got out of this project. So as I was saying, this was a project which was conducted in the European framework, in the framework of the committee, which represents actually, it gathers a representative from the 27 postal companies of the European Union and the respective trade unions of the 27 member states. So it's a joint parliamentary committee with representative of postal companies and with representative of trade unions. So this project was conducted in 2018-2019, and we had the opportunity to get the support from a consultant who was specialized in foresight methodology. The foresight methodology, which is also known as scenario planning methodology, aims in a step-by-step approach to define scenarios, to elaborate scenarios on the future. So as I was saying, our ambition was to elaborate scenarios on the future of the postal sector. We did that in 3 steps with 3 physical events. The first event took place in Paris, the second event took place in Bonn, and the third event took place in Warsaw. During each event, there was a gathering of several what we call social partners, so representatives from postal companies and trade unions, and the objective was really step by step to elaborate the different elements of the scenarios. And the last step of the project was a final conference in Brussels, where we disseminated the results, so the scenarios of this project. Next slide, please. So as I was saying, I will drive you through the different steps of the project. First of all, we had an event in Paris where there were about 30 participants. And the objective of this event was to elaborate, to define the 12 key factors which seemed of us the most important for the postal sector. So at the beginning, we had 18 factors. And through the discussion, the objective was to diminish the list of key factors and really to identify those who were of most importance for the postal sector. So as you see, those are the 12 factors that we decided to define in this framework. And these factors are very different. They are about, for instance, communication. They are about competition in the sector. They are about the world of work in general. They are about the situation of the society. So there were really broad factors which we believed would impact the most of the postal sector in 2030. So those were the results of the first workshop. Next slide, please. The second workshop. So what we did in the second workshop is that we took all these 12 factors, and the objective was to see for each factor what could be the possible evolution of each factor. So for each factor, we would have between 3 and 4 possible evolutions. For instance, if you take the factor which is called communication patterns, so how will the communication look like in the future, we had 3 possible evolutions. One possible evolution was that there will be a very digitalized society in the future. The second possibility would be that there would be what we call a digital fragmentation. So on the one hand, some people who would be reluctant to digitalization and use the traditional means of communication, and on the other hand, people who would be totally what we call digital natives and totally into the digital culture. That was the second possible evolution. The third possible evolution was a general digital fatigue, in the sense that people would be scared of using digital tools, or they would prefer to use, let's say, the traditional way of communicating. So this is just an example to highlight you how, for the 12 factors of change, the objective was really to see what would be the different evolution possibilities for each of these factors. So this was a work that we did in Germany, in Bonn, again with about 30 participants. And we had a lot of brainstorming and discussions in order to arrive to these different possible evolutions for each of the 12 factors. Next slide, please. So, as I was saying, we had for each of these factors the different possible evolutions. So how we got from 12 factors to the scenario is that we combined the different possible evolutions in order to reach the different scenarios. You can see here the different colors of the scenario. And actually, this is a combination of different evolution possibilities which gave us the different scenarios. So for instance, you see on the left side, we took the second possible evolution, we combined it with the fourth possible evolution, and so on, in order to be able to establish the 5 scenarios that were the output of the project. Next slide. So, as I was saying, based on these different evolutions, we were at the end of the project able to have 5 scenarios. Those 5 scenarios are really 5 possible different futures of the postal sector in 2030. We have 5 different realities of the economy and of the society. And all these scenarios aim to be as realistic as possible. So the objective is to see some signals which exist today and see that if they would evolve, you would go to, let's say, scenario 1, or you would go to scenario 2, or scenario 3, or scenario 4 and 5. And all these scenarios are we try these scenarios to be balanced, in the sense that all the scenarios have advantages and disadvantages. Yes, the idea was really to have realistic possible futures. So I will now go into the details of each of the scenario. I hope this is not too complicated, but well. So in order for people to be able to better understand the scenarios, we had drawn some visuals. This is the visual of the first scenario, which is called the standardized society. This is a bit to summarize like the Big Brother society. In this society, we see that the digital and social aspects are very important. We are actually in a society which is highly digitalized, but where the social conscience of people is also very high. This means that the intervention of the state is very important. And also one situation is that the economic growth is quite low. So in this context, there is a large use of data, which is actually strictly regulated and which enables an increased transparency. So actually, there is large use of data, and the data enables everything to be transparent. That's why I was referring to kind of the Big Brother society. In this context, we see that there are new forms of employment. So there are, for instance, freelancers, independent workers, but all this is done under good working conditions because there is a highly regulated social framework. When we consider how is the postal sector in this scenario, no, it's still the first one. Yeah. So on the postal sector in this scenario is under the influence of public institutions, and its aim is to provide public services with a high social value, and also to manage the data as a trusted provider of data. In the postal sector, in this case, there is low competition because the market is considered to be not so attractive for new entrants. So this is the first scenario. The second scenario. The second scenario is what we called a echo chamber society. Basically, this is a society where there is a high use of internet, highly digitalized society, but also at the same time, this is a society where there is a high individualization, meaning that people do not trust each other, and they are digitalized, but they are only connected with those people that they know best and that think the same way as they do. So actually, there is a mistrust for open digitalization. In this scenario, there is a lot of discrepancies, a lot of differences between people. There is a digital divide, meaning that some people are highly digitalized and others are using only traditional means of communication. There is also an important territorial division and also an important division in terms of forms of employment. On the one hand, you have people who have long-term employment contracts with good conditions, and on the other side, you have people with very precarious conditions, which are mainly freelancers. In this scenario, the postal sector is highly competitive, with the main activities being parcels. And the new entrants, for instance, companies like the private postal companies or Amazon, are in a dominant position in this scenario. And the historic postal companies like ELTA or La Poste are a very low market share. Next slide. So this is the third scenario that we have come to in the project, which we called the vicious circle society. So this is a society where there is a strong protectionism. If you want, you can imagine a world where the philosophy of Trump, for instance, would be the predominant one. So each country is much isolated, and there is not much exchanges at the international level between countries. So in this scenario, each of the people has a very securitarian position, and there is what we call a digital fatigue. There is limited innovation and limited digital exchanges, because everything is clustered, limited to the national perimeter. In this context, there is a stagnation of the economy and very important social disparities. Also, the new forms of employment that we see are in very precarious conditions. So all these signals are quite negative. One of the positive aspects is because there is low exchanges between countries, that the climate change, so the environmental negative impact on environment, has also decreased. In this context of this scenario, what we see is that the postal sector is faced with limited competition, and also that the quality of the service, of the public service in the postal sector is also low. So this is a scenario which is not so positive. Let's move now to the fourth scenario. The fourth scenario, which is called the adaptable society, is more or less a scenario where we would expect the status quo, so the current situation, to continue also in the future. So in this scenario, there is a different use of the internet and of the digital tools depending on the population. In this scenario, the regulation is quite reactive, and also the digital tools are reactive. So that means that overall, the digital tools and the regulatory tools are not adapted, not quick enough to adapt in order to face the new challenges. In this scenario, we see that there is an important economic growth, but also that this growth goes together with important disparities in the society. So there are new precarious forms of employment. So on the one hand, there are like the independent workers, freelancers, and on the other hand, there are the employees who are under long-term contracts. So there is an important divide. In this scenario, in the postal sector, the new entrants, so the competitors, are the predominant ones. And actually the regulation in particular on the universal service, only covers traditional activities. Next scenario, please. Next scenario. Thank you. So the last scenario is more of a, let's say, idealistic scenario. It was a scenario which was suggested by the trade unions, which is a bit of a, as I was saying, ideal world. So this is a society where there is a strong innovation and also a strong digitalization. In this society, there is an important economic growth, and social dialogue is the mean of regulation. So the regulation is done through social dialogue. In this scenario, there are new forms of employment. So there are like independent workers, there are freelancers, but all these workers are working under good social conditions. In this scenario, the postal service is a provider of new services which are actually integrated in the universal service obligation. And also in this scenario, there is not much competition. there is a decreasing interest for new entrants to enter a market which is actually limited in terms of competition. A negative element of this scenario, there are very few negative elements in that scenario, but one negative element is that there is a high inflation. Just some words to summarize the project. The project itself actually was very interesting for the social partners of the European postal sector, so both for postal companies and for trade unions, because it was a very innovative project. It was innovative in the format of the workshops, because the workshops were much turned around having brainstorming, about having interactive sessions, and really be able to think out of the box. So the idea was really to be very innovative, to be very interactive. This project was also very ambitious in terms of content, because as I was saying, what we got out of the project is 5 scenarios which describe the postal sector in the future in 2030. We consider these scenarios, of course, to be models, to be possible conceptions of the future. But what is interesting is to see how these scenarios can drive our action today. This is the most important. So this was the previous project, and now we will have a new project which will be conducted in 2020 and 2021, and whose objective is, out of these 5 scenarios, to see what will be the most important postal functions in the 5 scenarios. So how will delivery look like, how will sorting look like, and how will the different postal activities look like in the 5 scenarios. So the idea is really, if you take, for instance, the function of a postman, is really to see what will be the daily life of a postman, what will be his or her working conditions, who he will interact with, what type of vehicle he will use, what type of people he will serve, what will be the service that this person will offer. So the idea is really, we have the 5 realities of the future, and within these 5 realities, to see what can be the different postal employees' reality. So the idea is really to make these 5 scenarios even more concrete to the postal sector, and even more concrete to postal employees. So that was for me, Aphrodite. I hope it was clear enough and not too complicated. I know it's not always easy to follow these 5 scenarios, but as I was saying, my idea was really to show you how we got to this innovative project, how we brainstormed, and how we really were able to think out of the box and to consider the different realities in the future.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Να πω ότι η Επιτροπή Κοινωνικού Διαλόγου κάνει εξαιρετική δουλειά ούτως ή άλλως. Συμμετέχουν εκεί τα ΕΛΤΑ, εκπροσωπούνται από τη Διεύθυνση αποστελέχη της Διεύθυνσης Ανθρώπινου Δυναμικού.
The Social Health Committee is doing an excellent job on this. I want to ask you, of course, this will be evident in the next project that will be running from March. But I wanted to ask, what are the main challenges that you see that the postal sector is facing in the next years? If you can.
This is not an easy question, obviously. But I think, I mean, out of this project, the main challenges for the postal sector are, first of all, what will be the forms of employment in the future. So whether we will stick to long-term employment contracts or civil servants in some cases, like in ELTA, like in La Poste, so in many postal companies, or if we will have like a combination of open-ended contracts and independent workers, freelancers. So I think this is one of the main issues. As I was saying, and this is the objective of the second project, what is important to understand is what will be the function of the postal employees in the future, because it can be that delivery will be totally different. As we know, maybe there will be no more delivery of mail, only delivery of parcels, or some new functions can appear, like for instance, the drone drivers or a lot of IT workers to manage all the IT system that the postal sector will have to work with. So I think this is obviously one of the main challenges. And the second challenge, but this is very much linked to the first one, is the type of activities that the postal sector will be doing in the future. Because as we know, and if we see the different postal companies in Europe, they are very different in terms of activities. For instance, if you take the German Post is a logistics provider. If you take the Italian Post, it is more like a banking insurance activity. If you take La Poste, it is a multi-service activity. We have banking, we have parcels, we have new proximity services. So I think really one of the challenge for the postal sector in the future, it is what will be the definition of the postal sector and what will be the activities. And at the end, what will be the core activities which enable us to consider ourselves as a sector.
Και σε επίπεδο υπηρεσιών, βέβαια,
both at a service level, as you said, the post in France and Germany have also different and there is a difference in the skills that the postal employees need to have in the future. It's not just about the functions that they will have, but also what the skills they will need in future. Perfect. Thank you very much.